and they went to pull me out, and there was like some noise, and I fell a few feet and stopped. And there was like the safety rope holding me, and I thought, what was that? And they go, and there was like no answer. And then they said, oh, we'll tell you when you get up.
Oh, God. This is not your typical venture podcast. We assume the listener or the viewer can Google simple things like stage, industry focus, average check size, etc. Guests and interviewers do consume alcoholic drinks during the taping of our show. So we do so responsibly, and we ask that everyone do so as well. So let's begin.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Drinks with a VC. I'm Vic Laquara. I'm the founder and general partner of GreenCow Venture Capital, a seed stage venture fund. And I'm joined, as always, by the co-hostess with the mostest, Bree Hansen. Bree runs biz dev for Burkland, a wonderful shop that provides CFO services for startups. So if you're interested in that, please reach out. Bree, how are you?
I am doing well, Vic, but we have missed you dearly here at Drinks with a VC.
Thank you for that. I do want to start off by addressing a certain rumor that's been going around. In February, I got the flu. And then in March, I went on this amazing trip to Egypt. And when I returned, a few folks have been pinging me saying, are you okay? Have you been axed from the Drinks with a VC podcast and replaced by our very own, very sultry voiced, silver hair foxed Reynolds Morgan? Thank you, Reynolds, amazing producer. Which, look, I get that. But can you really trust someone with two first names?
No. And don't forget, he also goes by his middle name. Never trust anyone who goes by their middle name.
Very good point. Very good point. Well, truth be told, I have not been replaced. And now that is out of the way, I know you were very excited. I've got a ton of nervous excitement over here. I don't know if you can feel it. How are you doing?
Yes. Well, our next guest I met on March 5th of 2020, and I'll never forget how we met because he was pretty much the last person I saw before quarantine. So it was an unforgettable experience for me. Why are you nervous?
So, I think it's a couple of things. So I think when I don't have a relationship with the guest prior to them coming on the show, there's always a little bit of giddy, nervous excitement. But then it gets amped up like to a completely different level when the guest in question is an avid reader. And I find that very intimidating. I'm also very envious of the intentionality that goes into actively reading books and taking the time to learn on your own and from a written thing. I'm nervous.
That explains it. He is actually known as being literally having one of the best libraries in Silicon Valley. Has actually been written up by the Wall Street Journal for his library. And I did get a little sneak peek of it myself when I visited his home in Atherton. So why don't you do what you do, Vic, and introduce our guest?
Right then. All right, here we go. So our next guest has an illustrious career in technology as both an operator and an investor. After receiving a BA in astrophysics from Pomona College, he had a short stint at Xerox before going to work at Ultratech Stepper, a semiconductor capital equipment company, where he was eventually promoted to managing director of their Asian operations based in Hong Kong. Shortly after that, he would co-found Artisan Components in 1991 and was also their VP of sales. Artisan would eventually be acquired by ARM Holdings in 2004 for, I believe, $1 billion. After 15 years as a founder, leader, sales, and business development professional at technology companies, he found his seat on the other side of the table at Alloy Ventures. His first investment as a VC, do you know what it was, Brie?
Ellie Mae.
Yes, a little company called Electronic Mortgage Affiliates, now known as Ellie Mae. He's made investments and holds board seats into companies like Cerenova, Ensenada, Molecular Imprints, Gradient Design Automation, Integrated Materials, Teradici, IP Extreme, and Integrated Photovoltaics. He is on the steering committee of the Israel Collaboration Network, also known as ICON, and a member of the board of directors of the Shalom Hartman Institute. Please welcome the pride of Mira Costa High School in Manhattan Beach, California, Dan Rubin. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It is great to be here. It's just kind of weird hearing someone else read a collection of bios for you. Pretty darn good.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to be here. I do remember meeting Bree. It was just before the lockdown. In fact, the discussion was at that event, would there be a lockdown? And I have been locked down more than most.
Yes, very, very true. So Dan, what are you drinking tonight before we get into all that?
I have a 805 beer from the Firestone Walker Company. I am a normal beer drinker. And now I am inspired to drink beers by what my children show me. So my son introduced me to the 805 beers. He is of legal age, just to be clear.
Well, I want to thank your son. This is exciting because I really get to lean into these kinds of episodes. Most of our guests have chosen the whiskeys and the hard stuff. And now I get to showcase my favorite brewery in St. Louis. It's called Civil Life. And shout out to Jake Hafner and the team there. But I'm drinking their version of an Anchor Steam, which is a Californian common style beer. It's called Civil Common. So if you're ever in St. Louis, you gotta come to Civil Life and try this beer. It's really fantastic. But cheers to you, Dan. We're so excited to have you on the show, and we're excited to have this time with you.
Cheers.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of Mira Costa, just by the way, for all of our listeners and viewers, I do believe that you were in the same class as Jeff Rohrer, who's a professional football player with the Cowboys. Michelle Tafoya went through Mira Costa. Anitra Ford, who I believe was the first model on The Price is Right, also went to Mira Costa.
That's pretty good. I unfortunately have to correct you. It's Mira Costa.
Mira Costa
is the way at least we butchered the original Spanish pronunciation.
Fair enough.
Right. So the Southern California accent of it would be Mira Costa. Right. I knew Jeff quite well. He was actually a year ahead of me.
Okay.
And there was an event one time where my friends thought they needed to keep Jeff Rohrer from crashing the party that was at our house. And knowing Jeff, I just said, it's just really not worth the effort. Let's just invite him in. Right. This was long before we knew he would be one of the few professional football players from Mira Costa High School. But yes. And we have followed his career and post-career very closely since then.
Yeah. And Mira Costa has also been kind of a feeder for Olympic medalists and volleyball professionals. But you went a very different route. And you played a sport with a net, but like myself, you played badminton. How did you get into badminton? And I think you're still nationally ranked and hold a national rank.
So it's an odd thing. It turns out one of the other things Manhattan Beach is famous for, besides beach volleyball players, and yes, I overlapped with Mike Dodd, who was the coach of the Olympic team, and he lived around the corner, is there was a private indoor badminton club that was a few blocks from our house. And we joined when I was 11. And at some point in time, I said, this is what I want to focus on.
Yeah.
And my parents said, as long as you get good grades, you can do whatever you want. So I ended up on the junior national team, the adult national team, and traveled the world playing badminton. And it was a fascinating, fun experience. I even took a semester off college and tried to make a living as a semi-pro badminton player in London, of all things.
Wow.
I learned very quickly that my gene pool probably had other things in mind for me. I ended up making £5. Now you laugh, a pound in those days was like $2.50, right? So this is like, a lot of money.
There you go. Yeah.
For a starving student in 1980.
Sure.
And I came back to school and I started studying harder. And I played a lot when I moved to Northern California. And every few years when I turn another Magic age group number, people want me to come back out. I guess my highlight was in college, I won the state collegiate championships, beating all of the D1 kids as a D3 player. And that was kind of my peak at 19.
Yeah.
So.
That's amazing. I've got to take some tips from you. I went back to my high school and got on the court with a few freshmen and felt every bone in my body, every muscle after just being on the court for 35 minutes and hitting it around. It was painful. It was painful. I think you've moved on from badminton and found another athletic love in running. And I think one of the things I was reading about you is so impressive is that you're still posting PRs to this day. Do you want to tell us about your last race?
Please. I actually ran cross country in high school to train for badminton. And it turned out I was the worst kid on the team that didn't quit. And actually at my 40th high school reunion from Miracosta, I actually met the kid who was worse than me who quit. And I told him the story. He goes, yep, I quit because I was worse than you did. But I ran a few marathons when my wife was pregnant with our second kid, because I figured I would never have time to do that again. And then I woke up one day and the kids were out of the house and I said, I think I've always wanted to qualify for the Boston Marathon. Let's try to do this.
Yeah.
And so after 2 tries, I qualified and ran the Boston Marathon. And then I had some illness issues and then I recovered. And in 2019 at 59.5, I ran the CIM Sacramento Marathon. And ran a 3:32, which qualified me for Boston and New York. So that was kind of, one of my exciting, great kind of adult moments.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking.
Of course. I guess I'm very envious of you. And I want the 1 or 2 tips that you might have for someone that, I fell out of sports and out of really training 2-a-days, etc. And I'm searching for a couple of things, a couple of insights that might change my mindset a little bit and push me to regaining athleticism and health and that. What would be a couple of suggestions that you might have for people?
I have to hold down because I'm supposed to be writing this half a book length thing for all my friends on how do you keep running after 60 or whatever.
Yeah.
You got to stretch a lot.
Stretching.
You got to stretch a lot. And as the people I go to that help me stretch say, you can overstretch, but you can never stretch too often. Okay. And so like every time I go upstairs, I go, oh yeah, this is a reminder to stretch my calves. And you have to build up really, really slowly. And you always need to take at least 1, better 2 days off a week. And this idea of running or exercising or doing whatever it is every day, sure, when you're 18 or 25, but when you're a little bit older, you need the rest and your body appreciates it. So build up slowly and take 1 or 2 days off.
Well, and to your point, Bree and I are trying to be the #1 podcast amongst VCs when they're working out. So hopefully we're well on our way on that front.
I want to listen to in the sauna on speaker.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think we should just play it at the San Francisco Bay Club. in the
Yeah.
sauna, something of that nature. It'd be great. Um, well, as we do often on the show, we start with the origin story of our guest. And I think a question that we never get away from is around what kind of influence your parents and your siblings had on your upbringing. And because people assume a lot of times that you might have been around tech and that's why you got into tech. You might have, and I think that's 99% of the time just entirely false. So what was it like? Who are the key influences in your life early on?
Well, you said in surroundings and influence.
Yeah.
I was effectively born in Manhattan Beach. I believe it actually says Hollywood on my birth certificate. And I grew up in Manhattan Beach, 4 blocks from the beach,
Yeah.
2 blocks from the pier, if anybody knows Manhattan Beach well enough.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm one of those people who cannot complain at all about like the hand given to them early in life, right? It is about as good a place as you can kind of grow up and as safe of a place. And my parents were, escapees from the East Coast who didn't want snow. They were 2 Jewish parents in the medical business who were not doctors. So it was just assumed, unspoken, that I would be a doctor.
Yeah.
All the way. Even to the point where after my company in 1998, when I was 37 years old, went public, my dad said, now you have the time and the money to go back to medical school. So their deal was, as long as I studied and got good grades, I could do whatever else I wanted to do. And it was kind of this unspoken kind of rule. So I studied hard and then got in trouble kind of behind everybody's back.
Yeah.
But as long as the grades held up. So it was all about like studying and doing well.
Were those the values that they instilled in you, just a lot of studying and education, or were there other values that you felt like?
It was studying and education. And, one thing that I'll talk a little bit about later, my parents were always about being early to everything. And I don't think I appreciated this enough. We were always early to every event. And I have learned later in life the value of showing up 15 minutes before board meetings or 10 or 15 minutes before other events when I had a sales role. You just learn so much from it. And so in their mind, it was kind of all about the respect, about not being late, right? And in my experience, it has become sort of almost mercenary about like, what else can you learn that people aren't telling you by being early? So yeah, that was clearly a value about, getting there early.
That was a great life lesson, actually. When I was in sales, Dan, I remember sometimes when I went early, you would understand the beats and the rhythms of the office, which would help you with your sales presentation.
Oh, in the days where I was selling to fabless semiconductor companies, people always like put plaques on the wall and awards and all this kind of stuff. And I could learn so much. There was no internet then. You could learn so much about everything. And there was actually 2 times where our startup company where we were able to make payroll because I knew the receptionist by name well enough that she went back to accounting to pick up the deposit check so we could go make payroll. Wow. And yes, Bree, you're absolutely right. You learn so much by being there.
Yeah. Did you always know that you wanted to get into tech? So in other words,
no, not at all.
Yeah.
I assumed medical school. And then when I decided to do physics, I would do physics in medical school. And then my first summer at Xerox, I spent 4 summers working for Xerox down in El Segundo in Southern California. I wrote down on like the introduction thing that I wanted to get a PhD in math or physics. And my boss that summer said, well, don't be ridiculous. You're not the type of guy to get your PhD in anything. He says, all the PhD people I know keep neat notebooks and your notebook is pathetic. And you're too into talking to people to like go get your PhD. And so I was just going to do physics. And then after I went to England for a semester, I came back and I said, I want to do international relations and physics. And I trained to be a Cold Warrior, as I joked. I took Russian, I took physics, I had the CIA application and the State Department application. I looked at all of these different things, and then a buddy from my fraternity offered me a job in Silicon Valley if I could get up, and I came up. So it was with that much thought that I came to Silicon Valley 40 years ago.
A fond memory that you mentioned in your questionnaire. You said that one of the fondest memories from your childhood was spending time in the Pacific Northwest at the age of 17 entirely by yourself. And that, a couple of things, it typically doesn't make the top of our guest list in terms of, spending time in solitude. So curious as to what was memorable about that time and what that says
there
about
was
you.
no solitude involved.
Oh, okay.
No, it by myself, as in like without parents. Sorry, I wrote it.
Okay, all right. So this is like Rumspringa kind of thing.
Yes, this was like I was supposed to climb Mount Rainier with the Boy Scouts, and I was supposed to be at a badminton tournament, and they were a week apart, and I convinced my parents to let me do the whole thing by myself, and it kept getting extended, and it was all about getting in trouble and almost getting killed, and not having there was no email in those days. You called your parents, collect, every 2 weeks,
sure,
like, about whatever, and taking the Trailway bus home, and this kind of stuff. And if I ever get around to writing enough, it's the story that I would write for my kids.
Oh man, now I kind of want to know, Bree, don't you, about sort of the near death experience that you had in Mount Rainier?
Give us at least one good story from that trip.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I had been mouthing off to the leaders on the Mount Rainier climb. And this was supposed to be both a summit of Mount Rainier and like hardcore mountaineering training. So one of the things they teach you in these things is, in addition to all of the ice axe stuff and saving, is like, if you fall into a crevasse, how do you climb out? And so I was the first volunteer to go into the crevasse, and they lowered me down into this, just the most scary thing I've ever done, where you can't see the bottom and you're freezing cold. And there's some friends on a little ice bridge taking pictures, and it didn't work. They didn't set up the system right. I had trouble getting out, and they finally got it. You've been down there long enough, Dan. And they went to pull me out, and there was like some noise, and I fell a few feet and stopped. And there was like the safety rope holding me, and I thought, what was that? And they go, and there was like no answer. And then they said, oh, we'll tell you when you get up.
Oh, God.
And I saw that all my friends who were watching me raced over. And apparently they were pulling me up with this, they call it a Z pulley system.
Oh, man.
And some rope broke. And they all, like a cartoon character, all the people holding me fell down. And then like the rope slithered off. And like a childhood friend who had never like belayed on ice, did the right thing with the safety rope. And so I have never been back on snow or ice since.
Wow.
Woo.
That is harrowing.
Right.
Yeah. Do you still keep in touch with the kid, your classmate that had the heads up move there?
I do, and it's remarkable that you asked that question. He was actually one of my closest friends from elementary school, and he and I live 2 miles apart from each other now.
That's amazing. I have a question for you. This is unplanned entirely. Do you find yourself keeping in touch closer with your elementary school friends and high school friends versus your college friends? What's the mix there?
It's kind of mixed. There's a few friends from high school though that I'm still in touch with.
Yeah.
Just kind of nice and fun. And since my dad still lives in Manhattan Beach, there's always been reasons to go back to high school reunions.
In the beginning, we're going to shift a little bit here. That actually Bree mentioned in the beginning that you have a massive library, 2 floors in your home. And in your spare time, you love to read everything from espionage thrillers to books on hardcore political theory. Where did your lust and your love for books come from?
You know, at our house there was a lot of books, and I still remember some of the books that were, in the living room of our house. And I just always remember reading.
Yeah.
And when I traveled the Pacific Northwest, I had a bunch of books in my backpack, and I kind of always read. And then when I spent time in Asia and various other places, pre-internet, I just always carried a book and read this stuff. And then at some point in time, I was 14 or 15, I found out that you could buy used books at a bookstore. No such thing existed in Manhattan Beach, but in Long Beach, there was a place called Acres of Books.
Yeah.
Which was like the famous. Did you know Acres of Books?
Oh, I used to work in Long Beach. I would go there every Friday, and I would buy my dad a book from the World War II section because they had a huge war room full of war books.
And my history teacher in high school kept talking about Acres of Books. And I went there with like some kid books, and I got $12 in credits, and I got new books. And I have been buying used books since then. So I have historically, except for a brief period of time when, between January and March of 2000, when the market was really high, when I bought like used rare books, right? I just buy I buy like used books at bookstores, at Friends of the Library bookstore. And I had boxes and boxes and dozens of boxes of books. So I convinced the architects that I needed a library to hold those books.
His library is amazing. It has a ladder, correct?
No, it has a spiral staircase.
That's right.
Between the first and the second floor, and under the heading of first world problems, the architect said you can't have the ladder and the spiral staircase. It would look too much. So we have the spiral staircase. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, we should link to the article that Wall Street Journal did on your library. The photos are fantastic. Bree was saying that in 2012, you said that you had 3,000 books. What number are you at now?
I haven't counted since that article. My wife really wants me to give them old ones away as fast as I buy new ones. So I probably crept up a little bit from 3,000.
But
do you
sorry, go ahead.
Store? Because I used to be on the board of Friends of the Library in Newport Beach. So I used to be in charge of their dollar book sales. So super familiar.
Yeah, well, I used to take my kids to the Redwood City Library so they could read and get all excited. And then the joke was if they behaved, they got ice cream. And if I behaved, I got to spend like 20 minutes in the Friend of the Library book sale at the bottom floor.
That's great. Is there any particular way that you organize them?
No, there's sort of by sections. And because I'm a California boy and have been through earthquakes, the heavy books are not upstairs.
That's simple enough. Well, we to add a few more to the collection. So you should have a bag labeled B there. Go ahead and open that up, and we'll go through.
Bag B?
Bag B.
Wow. I have the Solomon Rushdie book.
Yep.
Thank you.
That's Vic. Vic, you want to say why you chose that book?
So like a lot of children's classics, it's chock full of a lot of inventive wordplay, and it's set in this very imaginative, immersive world. But there are quite a few adult themes, particularly around the power of the written word to challenge dictators. And I think when you read it, I don't know if you've read the story, but the heroine is a storyteller, and I think as VCs, oftentimes we kind of equate ourselves to being storytellers on behalf of our startups, on the behalf of the companies that we might work for. And so I just feel like as a VC with a strong moral compass, that it would
Oh, that's nice. I
be
really like
interesting
that.
for you.
I did read Midnight's Children. That's the only one I read by him.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a fantastic book. I read Haroon in the Sea of Stories when I was very young, and then like Herman Hesse, Siddhartha, I've read Haroon in the Sea of Stories multiple times since then, and every time I take something a little bit different from it. So worth a read for sure.
Then I had Inheritance by Danny Shapiro. I don't know the book.
So that was one I chose. And I love this book because it's about a woman who grew up Jewish and she gets a DNA test and finds out that her father is not her father. And she comes to grips with, is she Jewish? Who is she? It's a very good, I think, modern tale about people coming to grips with who they really are. But then there's this just overall, I think, common thread of just humanity. Like it doesn't really matter. Like we're all human. So it's just a really great story.
Bukowski Notes of a Dirty Man.
Yeah, of a dirty old man. That's from Ren. So you'll have to get his pick there.
We're not sure about the story.
This is the new one. I read the review. I do a much better job of reading book reviews now than I do of the books of Palo Alto.
Yes. So we picked that one for you because you love political stuff. This is supposed to be kind of a capitalist look at California and its role in society. And as a California boy, like both Vic and I are also native Californians.
Yeah.
So I figured you could read that and give us the Cliff's notes, or we can ask ChatGPT because that was a big one. I don't think I'm going to get through that one anytime soon.
Oh, and then you bought them at City Light Books. The City Light Books hat.
And we got you because we know you love running with hats.
Right. And I love City Light Books. The number of times I've taken my kids up there, super fun. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. Well, we'd love to kind of jump into that. Speaking of politics, littered across your questionnaire was, I am addicted to hardcore political theory. And so I think Bree and I are both really interested about what stoked that curiosity. It's even more interesting given your background in tech and your major at Pomona was not in politics, it was astrophysics. So where did it come from, man? What brought that about?
I literally had a class sophomore year in the history class, and we were reading sort of about the Enlightenment thinkers, and one teacher had this throwaway comment that's sort of like influenced Jefferson and the fathers of the country. And we're saying, like, wait a second, like how does this influence thing go, right? And the more you read about the early founders of whatever movement, right, the more you see that they were all influenced by somebody before that had written these books, and like fundamental, profound sea changes happen as people have written books, and sometimes those books are written, in Scotland in the 18th century, and not in Spain because of, various accidental things.
Yeah.
And just when I started hearing about this, I was absolutely fascinated by it. And if I could have figured out in college a way to make a living, reading this stuff, I would have. It just seemed like a technical degree during the Reagan military boom was the easiest way to get a job.
Yeah.
And so now, as I have more time in my life, I'm not reading many physics books. I am reading, other books.
Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned influence. And my question to you is, have we always been this as a society where everything has become politicized? Like the fact that I can't drink a Bud Light without it being politicized, or is this purely a construct of the social media channels that we have now that magnify voices of influencers and politicians, etc., that has created this dynamic where everything is politics and you have to pick a side?
I think social media has made it a lot worse, but the country's gone through these times. You think about the US at the time of the Civil War, right? Or of the lies that happened in, my American history isn't precise enough, in the first or second election, where people would run around and say, oh, the other candidate died, right? Or, you know, or civil wars or revolutions that happen in countries. I mean, you think about, you know, Germany after World War II, right?
Yeah.
That was completely politicized, where people said, well, I have to be a Nazi or I have to support Hitler because I can't be a communist, right? And the range of choices was 100 times worse than what, you know, we have to face here.
Yeah.
So I think it looks bad, and I'm sure social media has influenced it. But I think it's been around a lot longer. And then the question is really, how deep is it?
Yeah.
Right? Because, you know, once you get out of this country and you meet another American and you're going, oh, you're a hunter and you voted for Trump, right? And I was like, oh yeah, well, I'm not. And, you know, and right. And I voted for Hillary. And it's like, well, let's have dinner together anyways, because we're the only two Americans here. Right? Yeah. And I think the divisions can collapse fairly quickly in a lot of ways. And I think we just hear the most extreme voices. So I'm left a lot more optimistic than most.
So I've got a question, and this is, so you seem to have a lot of interest in politics, religion, and then obviously business. And sometimes I look at the leaders of those three groups and I see a lot of similarities in leadership. You know, you can look at Caesar and look at the way he led, and that led to a lot of people, you know, obviously getting discontent with the way he leads. And we see that in also religion, and we see that at business. What have you learned about leadership in studying politics, religion, and business?
You know, it's all really hard, right? It's all about, Rick, I'm going to use your words, telling a story and selling a message. I like telling stories. I like having a thing to sell or something to get at. But you can learn a lot from whether it be military leaders or religious leaders or political leaders on who are the successful ones and how they have dealt with like the unending difficulties in telling a story, and, you know, pulling those stories out at various board meetings to calm everybody down sometimes helps.
Let's switch subjects a little bit. You listed Goldie Mayer as one of your people that you admire the most. And for our listeners and viewers out there, she is the first prime minister of Israel that was a female, and also the fourth prime minister overall, I believe. And she was known as the Iron Lady. But why did you choose her? Where was the influence there?
Like, you couldn't get a harder task than trying to be a woman prime minister in the Middle East, where Hebrew was, I think, her third or maybe fourth language. Wow. Right? Came up she moved from the United States, or she had moved from Ukraine to the United States, and then to Israel, where it was under British rule, eventually independence. So the situation was so hard and so difficult, right? And her whole life is about, well, what, you know, she used to say versions like, you know, don't let, you know, perfection be the enemy of the good, right? Like, how do you solve the problem at hand, knowing that you can't solve everything? And then simultaneously, and this is why I've also kind of, the other one I love from the Middle East is T.E. Lawrence, of Lawrence of Arabia, right? Who was sort of a generation before her. He was kind of active in World War I. It was like their secret was not just learning the local language, but like understanding all of the tribes and political influences that were there at the time. How do you understand all of the little players, what everybody's motivations are? And from that, you could have a better chance of getting done what you wanted to get done. And so to me, it was always an insight on at least those two characters for me, right? And they just had fascinating stories and fascinating lives. So it's kind of fun to read them. And there's thousands of other examples of like, how do you go into a new environment and say, I want to accomplish something, and make sure you read everything you can and you talk to everybody you can, right? With the understanding that you're only going to get a fraction of it done.
Wow. Yeah. She sounds like she was a good listener.
She was probably a good listener, and she just kind of really understood. She had really good political instinct. Some people are like that. Bill Clinton was like that. Just kind of understood enough about what everybody else thought, your friends and your enemies, and the different fractions of different parties, to kind of understand how do you get things done.
We wanted to get a little bit more into the business side of things. We all know what just happened with SVB. There was a run on collapse, and it was very politicized. This has also ushered in a new era of skepticism, a noticeable slowdown in deals. Actually, I can say I saw Greg at the Upfront Summit prior to it, and he was showing a slowdown of deals on his presentation. So it should have come to no surprise to him that everything is slowing down a lot in the VC community. On the one hand, this is a fantastic time to be building. On the other, it's really difficult to be fundraising. How do you think that companies should operate under these current conditions?
I'm old enough. Unfortunately, I've been here at least twice, right? We saw this in 08, 09, right? We saw this after 01, 02. And as they always say, the best companies are built during these times. Right? Yes. The company that I was a co-founder of, I was the fifth co-founder of the five co-founders, was started in March of 91. Right? There was an article in Inc. magazine that one of the founders saved that was titled, "Is now the best time to start a company?" It was a giant recession, right, back then. And there was giant disruptions in the semiconductor industry. There was opportunities for new companies, and you have to run your business or your venture firm according to like the terrain you find yourselves on, right? The military history view of it. And if the environment doesn't have a lot of funding and it's time to go figure out how to be profitable or not, or to run experiments on what's the right product, then now's the time to do it. And this is why I think the opportunity for the great companies to kind of figure out those parts again. It's not all just kind of vertical SaaS, right? We have to do a lot of different things, and we have to think really hard about what's the right way to sell, who are your right partners, what's the right business model. And it's always like that. It's just now when everybody says, well, what do we focus on, right? You just got to be a little bit more focused on some of the fundamentals.
So you bring up fundamentals. This is all happening with the backdrop of SBF and FTX, right? And I think a lot of investors in our shoes, advising companies, we see that there's a healthy amount of skepticism now and a healthy amount of distrust amongst our LPs funding us, and making sure that we're doing the proper due diligence into the companies that we're funding and being good fiduciaries of their capital. And so at this point in time, startups are not only having to deal with, the volatility that happens when an SVB, occurs, but they're also dealing with a noticeable uptick in the scrutiny that they're facing with regards to their business model. And uh, I'd love to understand, because you've been there, you've done that, as you said, you've gone through multiple cycles like this, and you've spent a lot of time guiding companies through their journey of finding the right business model. Can you tell us a little bit about how that process might have evolved over this period of time, how it might be different? And then we'd love to kind of dig into a couple of those bits and see how you've come out on the other end.
So there's this fallacy, I think, both in politics and business, that you can sort of predict or engineer the future, right? And the best that you can do is like talk to a lot of people, especially those who don't agree with you, right? To try to understand, what's over like the next month's or quarter's horizon. And when there's giant disruptions, and my guess is AI will be as big, or if not bigger disruption than all of them, there are really interesting opportunities to say, well, what should the right business model be? Right. And again, it's not all vertical SaaS. We all understand kind of how to go ramp and what metrics are for vertical SaaS. There was a day where we didn't know what SaaS was, right? We had to figure out, if we had to handle the compute, and not the customer we sold disks to, right? Would our margins collapse? And this kind of stuff. So I think there's always changes, and I think it's a normal, after Silicon Valley Bank failed, we all said, well, what happened to the risk officers, right? Well, in some ways there ought to be, that's the role of a board, that's the role of a diverse founder group. That's the best single argument for diversity at a company with a different backgrounds and difference of opinion is to try to increase the chances that someone says, maybe I shouldn't have all my money at Silicon Valley Bank, right? Or whatever the particular kind of issue is. So I think it's the job of the founders and the management team and the board to sort of always be looking at, like, what should that kind of model be? How should we be operating?
Yeah. Could you take us through Artisan Components, for instance, the company you founded in 91, and sort of learnings from that?
Yeah, so I was the fifth co-founder, as I like to say, and it's important because the other four co-founders came out of the electronic design automation space, the software for designing the chips. This was a big part of the semiconductor industry. So once upon a time, there were monoliths like Intel and AMD and IBM, and then eventually you had like semiconductor equipment manufacturers, and then a different group would design the software that would help you make the chips, and then TSMC in Taiwan showed up, right, to say, well, you can be a fabulous semiconductor company, and you can just do the design and we'll manufacture for you, right? Over many other beers, we'll tell you stories about, I used to eat in the cafeteria at TSMC before it was TSMC, right? As we helped that company get off the ground in '86, literally in my in a previous job. And then the founder, who I had worked with before, said, oh, well, maybe there's this like other component spinning out, which is semiconductor intellectual property, all of kind of the base libraries, base components. And maybe there should be a company doing this. So like with as much thought of that, he like left his job, grabbed three other founders with no money, and they started the company. And then I was having breakfast with him, and he invited me to be the fifth co-founder. And I said, but I don't know anything about this space. I took 2 electrical engineering classes in college, but I don't know this space. He goes, no, we want someone who's not from the industry who will help us think different. Right. And I thought, I think of that comment more and more now. Right. So basically, we all collectively, I asked a lot of questions. Well, why are we doing it this way? Right? This makes no sense to me. And he goes, well, that's what it's always been done that way. Well, that's not really a good enough answer. Let's figure out what to do. And then I had this kind of epiphany one time where I was trying to sell to a particular, he was an Israeli semiconductor fabulous startup company. And he said, I'm not going to buy your product. I go, well, why not? Everyone else is buying. He goes, it doesn't make any sense, your distribution strategy. I should be buying this from the semiconductor foundry, from TSMC, not from you. And I went back and I said, the guy has a point, right? And so they go, no, he's wrong. So I went to talk to him again, and he sort of told me exactly why he couldn't buy from us. And we changed our entire business model based on this one customer saying, I needed to buy through that particular distribution channel, right? And that made all the difference in the world. We wiped out all of the competitors. Company got public. It was the second IPO after the Asian crisis, and then I left before it was sold. But then ARM bought it for $1 billion a few years later.
Yeah.
2 really great lessons you've really brought up, Dan, is 1, don't surround yourself with yes people. Surround yourself with diversity of thought. And 2, listen to your customers,
especially the ones that tell you no, right?
Yeah.
We always talk about listening to our customers. And to me, it was like the great insight, right? Everyone says, well, I want this feature. I want it to be blue. I want the wires to go this way. I want the software to do this way. And, we're all trained to do that, right? But it was like, we weren't trained to go listen to the customer say no. And I just got lucky that someone said, no, go back, talk to him again. Well, he had an insight.
Yeah. Why do you think it is that so many companies out there, when they achieve a certain maturity size, that they fail to continue to listen to those customers that are saying no?
I think it's just the natural growth of employees.
Yeah.
It's like you hire a salesperson, you give them a commission, you train them to focus on the most likely deals they're going to close, and there's no motivation for that saleswoman to spend any more time with the customers that said no. Yeah. And the person who's trained to do that is like the land and expand first person on the beach kind of biz dev level VP, but they don't want to talk to the little customer anymore. They're busy figuring something else out, right? We actually, in our life, in our social environment, and in our businesses, we don't really have a good way to kind of look at the minority opinion, if you will. Kind of have to institutionalize
that. So oftentimes on the show, we point to a lot of the questions that, when answered, can really be very insightful for founders. I'm going to be a little bit selfish here and talk for all of the young VCs that are out there that want to get better at talking to their founders. And I'm interested in learning a little bit from you about what is the best way for investors to build relationships with their founders and their portfolios, so that you can have these hard questions with them. You can be the no man in the room that says, hey, look, you're not listening to your customers and you need to do this, but do so in a way that they listen to you, that it doesn't just go in one ear and not the other.
Yeah, I don't know if I have the best way. I have some successes. There were certainly some failures from which I learned also about how to do that. But in some ways, it's like any relationship. You have to put in the time, right? You have to spend enough time with the CEO of the company. In fact, one of my partners at Alloy used to joke that you should spend enough time with the CEO one-on-one, whether it's over drinks or dinner, that you can get in a giant argument on the phone, say F you, slam down the phone, and then call him back the next day and have a normal conversation. Like, like, can you get to that level, right, where it's really like a relationship, right, where there's enough of the things that you can actually have that level of argument. And I think it has to be built on this odd relationship between a venture person and a CEO, which is like, neither of you actually know the correct answer all the time, right? And you're not paid to know the correct answer all the time. Especially young CEOs think they have to have known the correct answer all the time, and that we're really trying to figure this out together, right? So like, when I, as a venture person, am talking to other people at the company, that's not to like go behind your back to like see if it's time to fire you yet, right? It's really all of, I have done that, don't worry. Right? It is really all about like trying to figure out what else is going on in the business that I can understand enough that I can ask you the best questions. So like, if you say, oh, Mr. CEO, I want to talk to your COO, and you don't tell them why, then they're going to be suspicious. If you say like, God, coming out of the board meeting, there was some really good points. There's a few things I really don't understand, right? Tell me who at the company I should go talk to so I can understand the stuff, so I won't be as like dumb of a VC, and I can kind of help. That kind of approach kind of most of the time sort of builds confidence with the CEO, because you want to be there together helping. And then show respect, like, literally show up early, right? I learned so much from showing up early at board meetings. You get to meet other people, you get to talk to other people, everybody's guard is down. The CEO's not in, oh my God, I have to do this presentation to the board for the second mode, right? Everyone's kind of joking, and you can learn a lot. I have a wonderful story. I used to show up early to the Ellie Mae board meetings. It was a long commute. In those days, we had to drive, so I'd always get there early. And there was a woman who worked right outside the door of where the board meeting is, and she had like the most menial data entry job. And we used to always say hi. And at some point in time, she kind of hinted to me that how busy she was really the best correlation to how well the company was doing.
Interesting.
And it was like, but I would always ask her, like, well, how busy have you been, right? And it was like this other metric. Well, then I started bringing in donuts for her and her team. And so this became a whole joke among the board that Dan was always bringing donuts to bribe this team for more information, right? It was like the most wonderful story. Like, I wanted the whole, I didn't know that, I wasn't smart enough to know it at the time, right? But the fact that the CEO knew that I was trying to learn about the business from like the lowest paid employee at the company, right? That's kind of a sense that you're building a team together.
I don't know if you've thought too much about this, but do you feel like VC founder relationships are less like a marriage now, and they're more transactional, and so it's less effective? Or is there some sort of hope that we can come back from that and go back to
I may have to answer
the way
yes
it was?
to both parts of your question. No, I worry a lot recently. I would say particularly among younger board members and younger investors, right? Especially if they're newer funds and they don't have kind of the old retiring partners, right? Whose only goal there is to kind of train the new partners. And the amount that I learned from my retiring older partners was just extraordinary. And I think I think it has become transactional, and there's this like, oh, I got to make this deal happen super quickly because I need the checkbox so I can like, have the win and do my next fund or leave and do my next fund. I think it has become very, very, very transactional. And I do hope we can get back to it. I worry a little bit about when there's so many deals and so much to do, and the time frame, everyone wants the time frames to compress. And I hope we get back to it.
Do you think assets under management, just kind of like that explosion, has a lot to do that, and the pressures that are on that?
Well, as the same very smart partner at Alloy used to say, there is no asset class that can't be ruined by too much capital going into it. I actually worry less about the number of dollars in than the number of deals that people have to deal with.
Sure.
Right. And, under steady state, there's some average number. And when everything's going up to the right, you kind of think you're Superman and Superwoman and you can take on more deals. Right. But then you get back to the Silicon Valley Bank failure, right, which, by the way, happened the night of the rehearsal dinner for my daughter's wedding, and my daughter and son-in-law are all of their friends are in venture or at startups one way or another, and everyone was asking me like, well, what's going to happen? You guys are closer to the ground than this. I think we're now back to the kind of the normal state of affairs where things are rocky and you got to figure out business models and you got to make tough calls. And, you better have the bandwidth to go spend that time working it out, right? Don't think of it as like the worst task in the world. Think of it as, oh, that's your job. And that's the learning that goes on, when you help company A navigate through something, you can help company B.
So Dan, we talked a little bit about not wanting to surround yourself with yes men. How do you go about soliciting alternative viewpoints as you get higher and higher up and more people are more likely to tell you what you want to hear?
Yeah, I think you have to force yourself to do that. And I think, the worse it gets on social media, Vic, to your point earlier, the more you have to do it. One of my closest friends, he's been a friend since we moved up to Silicon Valley, is politically the opposite of me. And so I made a deal with him that I would read the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal every day, and he would read the editorial page of the New York Times every day. He did not keep up his end of the bargain. I did, right? And I find it a fascinating experience to read the editorial page. You always read the rest of the paper, but to read the editorial section of the Wall Street Journal. And I just think the idea that you have to discuss the concept, that you have to discuss the ideas, because you can't be sure that you're right. And so it's kind of the people who are the most successful find and actively search out and find those people who can tell them, no, your idea isn't very good, or no, you need to keep probing in this area. I worked with a guy once who said it took two people to make David, the statue of David. It took Michelangelo to carve it, and it said someone else to say, stop. It kind of looks like David, right? you kind of need to find that other individual or group of people to run the ideas by.
And then, I think a lot of us have experienced a founder that they'll hear the no or the feedback, and they don't either know how to solicit the gold from that feedback, or they just discount it altogether. What's some of your advice to soliciting really good feedback and then making it actionable?
This is, you're saying, from a founder who's
looking
for a founder or a early CEO as they're kind of moving along.
Yeah, I would say an early CEO as they're moving along and they're trying to, because they'll hear like no, and then maybe they just move on, and they're not really soliciting that feedback.
Yeah, I struggle with this all the time because there's these people who herd knows and then keep plowing through and are kind of wildly successful at the end, right? There's story after story. But in almost all of them, right, you know, in the Facebook story, there's somebody who said, you know, let's just stay with college kids for a while before we move out, right? He had someone to talk to, right? You know, the rumor at Google was, you know, they started doing enterprise search, right? And it was this bootleg project to do paid search. I don't know if I can't confirm that story exactly, right? So, but I think it falls under the heading of like, don't be so certain that you're right, right? And seek out those people with different opinions, even if you don't listen to them, or even if you don't follow them, you still have practiced your storytelling and your argument. Back to our storytelling example there.
Lincoln's Team of Rivals, I think, is what that reminds me of.
Team of Rivals, spectacular book, spectacular story, absolutely, right?
Getting into storytelling and just kind of exploring that as an earlier founder. So now we're going earlier into the founder journey. Obviously, I think founders are told a different story, right? It's like, hey, be true to your North Star and stick with it, right? You find your narrative and you go forward. But oftentimes finding that narrative can be very difficult. And you've got a couple of different takes on the pitch and the narrative and storytelling. I'd love to hear those takes, particularly around the 1-minute coffee pitch. And I think there are 3 things that you tell all entrepreneurs to do when they're creating their pitch decks. So have at it.
Well, thank you. So everyone understands the 2-minute elevator pitch.
Yeah.
So none of us in Silicon Valley have buildings long enough that are last 2 minutes. But the idea is the founder finds the venture capitalist in the elevator and in 2 minutes can tell their story. But what I've always found is important is if I've just spent 45 minutes or an hour with a founder in a conference room where they're telling me their story, and then I go to refill my cup of coffee and I run into one of my partners and I tell her, I just saw this really exciting deal that does the following, and here's why I like it. So to me, the 1-minute coffee pitch is, what's the story that a moderately sophisticated investor, but who doesn't know the details of your company, can walk away with and tell their partners? And to me, if the entrepreneur can think back on how I want the venture capitalist to leave with that story, they might modify their pitch a little bit. That means leaving out like all of the product names. That means leaving out the bestest, greatest, because those are never words that I would use, right? It's a very simple thing of, here's what we're doing, or here's why the world changed that allows us to do this, and here's what we're doing, and here's why we should look further at it, right? So I call that the 1-minute coffee pitch. It is the non-sophisticated receiver of the story being able to retell.
Yeah.
Sense, because ultimately you're going to play telephone. You have to go pitch it. And if you don't pitch it correctly to your partners, they're going to say no.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to hear a lot of pitches and I'm only going to share the most exciting ones.
Yeah.
So yes, it's like playing telephone. I like that, Bree. When I heard, 5 other versions and I'm 5 other different stories, and I'm only going to pass one on.
Yeah. What's the best way to practice that? Is it just going up to your mom and saying, hey, here's my 1-minute coffee pitch, and then seeing what she recalls?
That's a good way. The other way I like it is when I do introductions for people, I effectively ask them to write me that 1-minute coffee pitch. What's the 80-word, 100-word introduction that I'm going to forward to my 10 friends who are VCs who do something, and I want you to write it as if it's from me, right? So bestest, greatest, all of those things you take out, right? my friend is doing the following. Here's why it's interesting. Here's why it's cool. It's a very straightforward thing. Yeah. And I found some entrepreneurs can write that the first time, and some can't even get the concept of it. Yeah. So I would practice being able to write the story that your friend is going to forward. And then the other thing that I advise founders to do is when they're doing their presentation, right? I'm like old-fashioned, and I really like them to have an agenda slide. This is like silly tactics, if you will, because look, now they're on Zoom, kind of everybody's there, but when we go back to the office, there's this bad habit of some venture capitalist coming in late, right? And then there's always this habit of venture capitalists kind of showing off and wanting to ask a question, before their partner type thing. Right. So one way to handle that is by having an agenda slide. And even if you don't read through the agenda slide, it's like a 3-minute pause where you're waiting for the late people to come in. Right. And then someone says, oh, I see on your agenda slide that you're going to talk about lessons learned or progress to date. I'm really interested in that. Well, once someone comments on what's on the agenda slide, you know exactly what to say when you get to that part of the slide, and it kind of keeps things on track. Yeah. Right. If you haven't had the agenda slide, someone says, well, wait, when are you going to raise money? But if you told everybody when you're going to see it. Now, I know a lot of people in this day and age, especially in Zoom, review decks ahead of time. But, we're going to go back to the period where, not everyone's reviewing the deck. And sometimes the first time they've seen it is there. And then under the sales trick, the actual sections, when you talk about the things in the agenda slide, don't actually have to match word for word. Mm-hmm. Right? Some people like lessons learned. Some people like progress to date. So use them both and just, have multiple shots on goal.
Sure. Absolutely.
So,
and then
go ahead.
Sorry, Bree. Go ahead, Bree.
I was just gonna say, I love this tactical advice. I think this is meaty stuff. Go ahead.
And the other thing that I advise is when any entrepreneur is writing their pitch, they should have 3 PowerPoint presentations open literally at the same time. And one is the presentation they're going to give to the venture capitalist. One is the presentation for their customers. And one is the presentation for their partners or distribution partners. And if they don't know who that third one is, they got to figure that out. And the reason I recommend that all 3 slide decks are open at the same time, because often I see slides where it's really not for me as a venture capitalist. It was really a customer slide. If you have all 3 open at the same time, when you're making the deck, you can think, where should this, I love this slide. I love my pictures. I love my product. But where should that go? Yeah. Okay? And the classic case is, you see decks where it's we have the lowest cost product. Yeah. Well, I don't want to see that as a venture capitalist, right? I want to see we have the highest cost product, we have the highest margin, right? Yeah. I don't want to see product names, right? All of these features that people add, a lot of stuff that goes in the customer presentation. Sure. So look, I understand it's human nature to do this, right? So my trick is just have the 3 presentations opened up at the same time, and when you come up with a slide that you really love, just decide where it goes. Yeah,
yeah, I love that advice. To echo Bree, I think that's tactical advice that all of the founders out there that are listening or watching the show can employ right away. I would take that another step, Dan, and say, know who you're pitching, right? I mean, this is 101 of pitching, is understanding that you're pitching a VC. What are they interested in? What is their investment thesis? How do you line up with what they need from a bottom line perspective from you, right? What does your customer need? What do your partners need? And I think the answer is clear when you kind of view it through that lens, that you need to have 3 different decks, and the story is not the same. The narrative is so different, particularly in young founders. So many times I see decks that are aimed at their customers and not aimed at the investors. And it's not heartbreaking, but it's, it's like, it's frustrating. Why can't you?
I agree with you.
It
It was born in those frustrations. In fact, from particularly the young founders, that I came up with this idea, which is just have the 3 presentations open.
Sure.
And that might help them through that process of who are they selling to.
Yeah.
Right? Because, by the way, young founders often don't have the experience of ever having a sales role.
Right.
Or ever having to carry a bag, and this idea of who you're selling to. And then, of course, if you're in a SaaS sales machine today, right, you're already given who the customers are you're talking to, right?
Sure.
You don't learn that experience about trying to explain this or that to the customer.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I had to learn all of this kind of like on the fly in Asia, right?
Yeah.
Speaking through translators, right? Where the whole game was, how fast could you figure out the level of knowledge of your customer?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And that was like the hardest thing, right? Do they even know what they're doing? Where are they in the government ministry allocating semiconductor fabrication money? It was like, the misses were so great that I sort of figured out this, like, it is all about knowing about your customers.
Yeah. I'm so glad. I know Bree and I were smiling at each other, so I know she's happy about this too, that you bring up Hong Kong. Throughout reading and researching you, it is very clear to both of us that travel has played an important role in shaping you and your life, and has informed a lot of the ways that you go about being a leader and making investment decisions. Starting with Hong Kong, can you talk a little bit about the impact that your time there had on your personal and professional life?
Sure. I had a super great career at Ultratech Stepper, where I started, in the product marketing, as we called it, department. And I finally sort of did well enough that I was about ready to go back to business school. And I told the CEO that I was now ready to go to business school. And he said, "Nah, I got a different deal for you." And they made me managing director of Ultratech Stepper Hong Kong Limited, like a month before my 28th birthday. Right? And my wife and I moved out to Hong Kong, where there was like a fledgling operation, and we had, some running equipment in Taiwan and in Korea, with orders backed up by the Defense Department for approval for China, right? And it was this, I got to have an operating role with a P&L, and I got to hire people that didn't speak English, and sort of learn. And I got to sort of learn on the fly again how to be a salesperson in sort of the hardest possible environment.
Yeah.
Right? Where it was, the whole game was, how do you figure out what others understand about your product?
Yeah.
And it was a blast. We were there for 2 years. I covered Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, mainland China, and India. Yeah. And then I had a counterpart in Japan that I visited and helped out from time to time.
Yeah. Sidebar, there's no way that you didn't play badminton in all of those places. You must have.
It wasn't a story I was planning on telling, but I did bring my badminton rackets.
Yeah.
I did run into a buddy that I played with in the United States in Hong Kong. So I played in Hong Kong with some people.
Yeah. And
I played a few times in Taiwan, and word got out that there was this Guilo Gaijin, whether you're speaking Cantonese or Mandarin.
Yeah.
Who played remarkably good badminton.
Yeah.
And the TSMC's largest supplier of parts challenged me to a badminton match, for which he wanted to play for like money, like the purchase order on something.
Wow.
Right. And I was there with the CEO of my company, was like, Dan, I don't think you're authorized to bet $2,000 on a badminton match.
It does feel like an movie.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
And normally I lose. Normally I would lose to my customers. It's like, it's like golf.
Sure,
Like,
absolutely.
lose to your customer, but there was like a purchase order on the line.
Yeah, you got a PO on the line.
And I did beat him, but I made it close.
That's funny.
Unfortunately, he brought all of his employees. He had like 100 employees, like on the side of the gym in Taiwan, watching this thing. So
wow.
I kind of had to make it close. But yes, so, I did play badminton when I was in Asia.
If I had known high stakes badminton matches, existed, I would be all over that. I would have done that more.
It's the highest of high stakes badminton match at
$2,000 probably ever.
I don't think it got any higher than that. But
of all time, yeah, absolutely. I used to play badminton in Singapore and a few other spots, but my main love was always squash, and I'm a better squash player than I ever was a badminton player. And so I remember playing squash for work, for consulting trips that I would go on and have a great time in that part of the country, of the world.
We got sidetracked on badminton. Sorry.
Yeah. So are you, when you're not traveling for work, right? And you're doing it for fun. Are you a planner? Or are you more laissez-faire about, putting together an itinerary?
It sort of all depends. When I go to Europe or Asia, I'm a planner.
You're a planner.
I'm kidding. My wife or children are the planners, right?
Got it.
I have done the cross-country drive with my daughter when she was going to business school and back.
Yeah.
And that was all optimized on the number of states that we could go visit.
Fantastic.
Based on the weather condition, and the Rubin family rule for a new country or new state is you have to have eaten a meal or had a beer in the state.
That is a fair rule. I'm gonna.
That's a great rule.
So, like on Father's Day 4 years ago, I had a donut in Oklahoma, right? We drove out of our way on the way to Texas so we could have that.
Check that off the list. Oklahoma done.
Right. In South Dakota, we stopped at a McDonald's and I was still eating my Egg McMuffin when we crossed into Minnesota. And my daughter wasn't clear that should count because I had not actually finished my breakfast. But yes.
And did you give yourself South Dakota?
Yes, we have.
You did on that trip, right?
I said I'm just going to turn around and drive back if you don't count it.
Well, and looking ahead, so to the listeners and the viewers out there, our esteemed guest Dan Rubin is on a mission to add all 50 states to his BIN app, and with 49 down, the last one was Alaska. Are you fired up about North Dakota coming up?
I am, and we are trying to fit it in. We avoided it in the cold, right?
Yeah.
The question is, which weekend do we fly up to North Dakota to have?
Yeah,
but it's going to be done this year.
We are reaching that point in time of the show where Bree and I like to play a game called 5 Questions with Drinks for the VC. Now, the interesting thing about our 5 questions is that they've evolved over the several seasons that we've had. And we've kept a few of them, but we've also prompted ChatGPT and come up with a few others that we've thrown in there. So we're excited to unveil a whole new edition of 5 Questions with the Drinks with a VC. The Dan Rubin edition. Are you ready to play? I'll tell you this, you have a really good chance of winning because everyone wins. 100% pass rate on this one.
No right or wrong answer.
But you will be judged based on your answers. And not just by us, by our listeners and viewers, etc., all around the world.
Right.
So here we go. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Bree, serve it up.
What is your go-to karaoke song.
I know the one I will never do again, the 12 Days of Christmas, which I did I did in Hong Kong on the mistake, and it was the longest time to ever be up there. Right. My wife and I have not gotten over this. Yes. That's the one I would never do again.
That's amazing. That's amazing. All right. Number two, if you could invest in any fictional startup from a movie, TV show, or book, what would it be?
In one of the Tom Clancy novels,
Okay.
there was a security product that reworded a few sentences or a few words in every version of the document that went out. So if it got leaked, they could tell where the leak was from.
Ooh.
So from someone who wishes they had done more cybersecurity deals, and for all I know, it's done today.
Yeah.
Right. It's the Tom Clancy inside the CIA. You can figure out where the leaks come from. Security device.
Love it. Love it.
I like it. All right. If you could do it all over again, would you rather be an investor or a builder?
I am much happier being an investor.
Fantastic.
I really like I miss the operating stuff, but I like the switching context back and forth. And you can learn so much from being an investor in many deals to help the other ones.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Number 4. What movie best fits the future of the human race? WALL-E, where we've all degenerated into an obese state due to anti-gravity in the metaverse. Avatar, where we're dominated by this quest for resources, new worlds, and walking around in avatar bodies. Or The Matrix, where we're all in the simulation.
I'm having trouble with this one because I'm a lot more optimistic on kind of our ability to solve the resources climate change problem.
Okay.
So I'm leaning towards Avatar.
Okay.
But I think the resource finding, because of the, if you will, the technology competition of new companies figuring out, is going to make it a lot better than in Avatar. So Avatar 3, right?
Sure.
Avatar 3, would be the dramatic drop in unobtainium.
Fantastic. I love that. I love it. All right, Brie.
What is the one deal you passed on that you wish you hadn't?
So I actually have trouble finding a classic deal that I saw that came in and presented to me that we didn't do. Right. To me, my biggest mistake was not following up on some founders when it wasn't clear we could get in the deal. So, for example, I think I was the first venture capitalist ever to look at Napster.
Wow.
Like July of '99.
Wow.
I had to actually look up the date of Napster to see if I was kind of close here.
Yeah.
And I had a chat with the CEO, who was not Sean Parker, right? There was a CEO there. And I said, I downloaded the product and I used it. I said, this is the most amazing thing. What are you going to do about the legal problems that you've created?
Yeah.
And when she didn't have a good enough answer, I didn't follow up.
It was launched June 1st, 1999.
Right. So I became a venture capitalist in about May. My first deals were looking at music. When someone saw Napster, they said, Dan, you're our music guy. I never did a music deal. You should go look at it. I downloaded it and I picked up the phone and I called her.
Wow.
Yeah.
And my mistake was not following up, not going in there, right? Not talking to Sean Parker, understanding what they were doing. And we probably never would have done the deal.
Yeah.
Right. But no Sean and the connections, to me, that's my biggest mistake, is like not following just because I immediately said, oh, it can't work legally. Right. But there's enough other things I could have learned about it.
Yeah.
By the way, we have a very wonderful story about Napster in our house, which was my daughter, the one who just got married, was of perfect Napster downloading age, when Napster came out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And our rule was absolutely, under no circumstances would there be copyright violation in the Rubin household until you finished your homework.
That's a good rule.
That was our bribe. You could use Napster as long as you wanted, as long as you've done your homework.
Right, as long as you've done your homework. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, Dan, thank you for playing 5 questions with us. As a symbol of our thanks, we have one more gift to you. As you can imagine, we'd like for you to open up the bag labeled V now.
These are beautiful bags. Thank you.
Yeah, Ren and Bree have really upped the bag game, generally for across the world at this point.
Wonderful drinks with VC Patagonia vest.
Oh,
I actually do not own a Patagonia vest. It's hard to believe, right? As much as people sent me the Halloween costume jokes about little Patagonia vests for kids here. So I am very excited to have this. And I am putting it on right now. Vic, your question about differences in this country and politicization has kind of inspired me to kind of modify the answer, if I will, on the toast. And I would like to toast to people getting outside their comfort zones on their own opinions and really engaging with people who disagree fundamentally with them, to not try to convince them that they're wrong, but try to understand the environment from which they're coming. And maybe that helps a little bit. And maybe we can also use that a little bit in the venture and business world also. So we can sort of, all go forward and learn more.
Cheers to that. Thank you, Dan. We just thoroughly enjoyed tonight's conversation, and to all the listeners and the viewers out there, I think there were so many bits of advice and insights that you provided that are really invaluable. So again, thank you for your time. We really enjoyed the conversation. It's been one of my favorite episodes to record, and hopefully we can see you in person soon at some point in time. I've got to make it back to the Bay Area one of these days soon, and all the best to you.
Why, thank you. This was delightful, and I do want to put in a plug. By the way, I have had at least 3 of my companies who use Burkland, right? And use Burkland for different parts of their fractional CFO and other financial needs. And at least one of them stopped using Burkland, and they were the ones that got in the most trouble with Silicon Valley Bank. So that is my negative warning. I believe wouldn't have gotten as much trouble had they continued to stay with Burkland.
There you go. There you go. That's a fantastic plug. Yeah, that is a fantastic plug.
I actually heard from several VCs that the ones that had Burkland and the ones that didn't, there was a huge difference in how they were handling the SVB. So, excuse me. So I heard the same thing. So thank you, Dan.
Catch full episodes of Drinks with a VC on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcasts, and on YouTube for video. Be sure to subscribe for the latest episode drops.